For more insights on the latest developments, we're joined by Paul Fritch, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Switzerland and virtual executive and residence at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Fritch, thank you so much for joining us on Asia One. President Trump has warned that any Iranian attempt to assassinate him would trigger an overwhelming US military response. How seriously should this warning be taken?
Look at two separate questions. I think, first of all, the assassination of an American president by a foreign government would obviously be taken very seriously in Washington. There would certainly be a very swift and firm military response. That said, the U.S. Constitution does not allow for incumbent presidents to issue doomsday orders that would bind their presidents from beyond, bind their successors from beyond the grave. And the decision of exactly what form that retaliation would take would fall to Mr. Vance or President Trump's successor in that scenario.
And could President Trump's latest remarks complicate the ongoing diplomatic efforts, particularly as the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held talks in Oman?
Well, I don't believe that remark in particular will have any substantial impact on the negotiations. I think most people would assume that if a foreign government were to assassinate the U.S. president, the U.S. would respond militarily. What concerns me more are President Trump's repeated statements over the past 3 days that the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding is over in his term. And if the signal coming from Washington is that the United States no longer considers itself bound by the terms of the Islamabad Memorandum, we've seen public statements from Foreign Minister Araghchi that Iran will not continue to implement it unilaterally. And I think that there would need to be some additional negotiated understanding in order to get us back to an agreed ceasefire.
And Mr. Fritch, with Oman playing a mediating role once again, what are the realistic prospects for reducing tensions and preserving freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the strongest factor arguing in favor of a de-escalation and a reduction in tensions, a restoration of free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, is that it is in the long-term interest of both Iran and the United States. We got to the Islamabad Memorandum in the first place, not because these two sides have any particular affection for each other, but because both of them had independently come to the conclusion that they were unlikely to achieve their political objectives through exclusively military means. And I think despite the recent escalation and exchanges of fire, that is an underlying reality that underpins this conflict. And I think the logic of the situation would eventually lead both sides back to the negotiating table.
And after weeks of military exchanges, are Washington and Tehran still pursuing deterrence, or do you see a genuine path back to sustained negotiations?
Well, as I said, if there is a path back to negotiations, it will occur because each side independently has come to the conclusion that they are not going to achieve their objectives through military means. The United States was there several weeks ago when we agreed to the Islamabad Memorandum. And I don't think that any of the fundamental environmental factors of this conflict have changed. I think President Trump's options for military escalation are limited. The amount of public support that this conflict has had in the United States is extremely low. President Trump himself has said that he does not have a very high threshold for pain in terms of accepting the economic consequences of a long-term closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So I think eventually there will need to be some understanding between the two sides that restores some balance that de-escalates from where we are right now. But I think we've seen over the past several weeks how fragile such an understanding can be.
So looking ahead, what are the biggest risks to regional stability over the coming weeks, and what role can regional mediators such as Oman play in preventing another escalation?
Well, taking the second question first, the main role of international mediators is to provide a platform for communication and coordination between the United States and Iran, which do not have direct diplomatic relations. And I think we've seen Oman play this role in the past. We've seen Pakistan play it, I think, as effectively as one could expect. But ultimately, this is a question that's going to be up to the conflict parties themselves and not the mediators to decide. In terms of risks to stability in the region, I think the states of the region are vulnerable to the consequences of any military escalation. The depletion of ballistic missile interceptors since the beginning of the conflict has made them more vulnerable than they were at the beginning of March. And there are risks to damage to the region's energy infrastructure that could have long-term economic consequences for all states of the region.
Mr. Fritch, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it lots.